Welcome. I'm very excited to be here today with Brian Mihok, editor of Matchbook Stories. Welcome, Brian. Nice to see you.
Hey, it's great to be here. Thanks, Becky.
And I think it's actually Matchbook, not Matchbook Stories. Did I have that?
Matchbook, yeah.
Okay.
There is a second matchbook, but it seems inconsistent with
Ah,
their publication schedules. When we looked figure out what we were going to call matchbook many years ago, I looked and I couldn't find anything else called matchbook. Uh,
yeah.
but there's always somebody else out there who's
Right, right,
doing
right,
something
right.
interesting with your name.
Well, I'm very pleased to be here today with you. And before I hit record, we were just talking about your morning routine and how you get writing in. And it sounds like you're also teaching full time. Is this high school?
So yeah, it's I teach high school students. So
Okay.
I actually teach right now half time. The other half of the time I'm in the communications department. So I like take photos and make videos for the school. It's an independent school in the Bronx.
Oh, cool. Okay.
Um, and yeah, so usually during the school year, it's trying to try to find time to write, and
Right.
usually it's once on the weekend,
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
or if I get, if things really align, twice on the weekend.
Okay.
Um, but I have found that traffic has been unbearable to get to the Bronx from where I live. So
Mhm.
I've just decided that I'm not usually a morning person, but it's
Yeah.
just too bad. I'm going to get
Right.
up extra early and drive, leaving my
Good
house at
for
6 a.m.
you. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. And get to school before 7. But what that's allowed me to do is to write the first thing in the
Uh-huh.
morning before anybody's even on campus. I'm sitting there, I get a cup of coffee the minute that the lady puts the coffee urn out,
Right.
and sit there, and yeah, I get like 40 minutes of kind of
That's great.
uninterrupted writing. So it's
Yeah.
funny to think I've been doing that for about 2 or 3 weeks, and I've written
Right.
every day,
That's
every
great.
weekday. And now the
Yeah.
weekend is the time when I don't write. I'm like, this
Yeah.
is
Right.
life upside down.
So do you have trouble motivating in the morning to do that? Or
I
I'm
think
sure like being in traffic. Yeah.
my brain is just sludge in the morning.
Yeah.
So it's more just hard for my cognitive ability. Um,
Right.
but I mean, I do work at a school, and so I've had to get up early, train myself to work at a job like this for, I guess I'm gonna be starting maybe my 10th year here.
Oh,
Uh,
wow. Okay.
so I am acclimated to the morning,
Yeah.
and it's just a little earlier. But yeah, I've for my writing life, routine is a powerful thing to keep it
Yeah.
going.
Right.
So if the routine now is the early morning,
Mhm.
it's the
That's
routine makes it so that I don't have to really like get into the writing mood quite as much, or it won't take quite as long.
right.
Like,
Right.
it's like inspiration and the writing mood comes more often if I just happen to be doing it all the time.
Yeah, yeah. Good for you. Well, I think I wanted to ask about it because I think we're interested in your magazine. We're going to hear all about your magazine, but I think everybody also has questions about how
Yeah.
people manage, editing a magazine, working full time, and then getting your own writing in, plus submitting and all the kind of business stuff you have to
Right.
do.
It's all so easy.
It's a lot. Yeah, right. I've actually been reading, have you heard of the book Deep Work?
I have heard of that book. I haven't read it.
Yeah, he's a big proponent of just turning off the internet. Like, don't be on social media, don't, get into
Yeah.
checking email, all that stuff. And
Oh yeah. I mean, well, in a writing session, if I sit down to write,
mhm,
or if I sit down to read submissions, really I need to like not be confused by my phone or
yeah,
internet. Like,
right,
I know during a writing session, once I pick up my phone to check something,
right.
the writing session
It's
has
over.
continued.
I know. I understand. Okay, well, let's hear about Matchbook and your process of reading submissions and tell us, are you the founder of the magazine and when did you create it and why?
So I started Matchbook in 2009, June of 2009, with my friend and writer Edward Milani. Um, that was a long time ago now. But we initially started Matchbook. Matchbook has a slightly strange form in that we publish one short thing every 2 weeks, just one thing. And we have the writer write a little author's note on either the piece or their process or something that they are thinking about that's in relation to this thing that we've published. And that was because at that time, in even at that time in 2009, we felt like online publishing, it was such a cool opportunity for literature, but at the same time, it felt like drinking from a fire hose, where people, journals were like, here's our new issue. There's 78 pieces in it, and don't worry, we have another new issue next week with another 80 pieces. And we were just like, I can't, it's so much. And like that, winds up getting you a lot of traffic online because there's a lot of people associated with all that. But we were being slightly antagonistic in our approach and thought, well, literature is supposed to be read slowly and repeatedly. And so we thought, how do we make people, or at least provide us a publication where people could do that? So we were like, we're going to do one short piece every 2 weeks. And then, if you come back on the off week, it's just us being like, no, read this again. And so then, we did that for a number of years. And then, Edward stepped away, and my friend and writer and editor, RB Pillay, stepped in, and we did it up until just a few years ago, to 2021 or 22 or so. And then, as with all these things, they kind of run its course. They run their course in that you just get tired, and it's two people running a literary journal. I mean, I know people there's one person running a literary journal. I don't know how they do it. It seems really hard. So for the two of us to do it, we just got kind of tired. And so we were like, I guess the good thing was we were always on the same page. We always sort of like, I think I'm getting tired of this. And the other person would be like, I'm also getting tired of this. And so we were like, I think that means we can say goodbye. But there was the question also of like, do we hand it off to somebody else? Because I feel like Matchbook does have a nice readership and a lot of goodwill. And so, but then we were like, yeah, but we're also paying a small token fee to writers out of our pocket, and I don't really want to saddle someone else with doing that. And I also we didn't want Matchbook to go backwards and stop paying. So we were like, well, I think that means it's over. And then, the rest of COVID happened, and me in my life, I was trying to refigure things out after, once we all got through COVID, it was sort of like, what's important? What are the things that I care about and want to spend my time doing? Even if I barely have the time to do it, I still want to spend my time on those things. And Matchbook just sort of bubbled back up for me. So late last year, I thought, I contacted RB and said, what do you think about starting a Matchbook again? And he said, I think that's a great idea for you to do. And I said, okay. But he gave me his blessing and said, do what you need to do. So I decided that in order to make it sustainable, I needed to have a little bit of a larger staff. I needed to have more people working on it. People I trusted. I didn't want to go into the like, we have 78 readers, and that's a whole other model that I just wasn't that interested in. And so I was like, I just want like a nice trusted sort of group of people that whose taste and opinions and principles and ethics I trust. So I assembled that over the course of few months. And then since we restarted in June publishing of this year, and so we're back, and that's been really exciting. That's sort of the general introduction to Matchbook, I think.
So take us through your editorial process. What happens when a piece comes in? And actually, before we get to that, can you clarify, you publish fiction and nonfiction? And
we call it whatever form prose can take.
Okay.
So it's fiction, nonfiction, and like sometimes people call things hybrid. I don't know. None of these words are adequate, but if it's in prose, we're potentially interested in it. I do think Matchbook has, like, over the years, due to our taste and the things that we're interested in, developed kind of like a feel for when we read something, it feels like a Matchbook piece or it doesn't, which has been really actually helpful, because it feels like then Matchbook is just doing its own thing. It's collecting work that might be a really wide range of styles, but there's just something about, there's a strong voice, or sometimes there's a density, I think, to the pieces. Or I was asking somebody else, a reader, what do you think there's like a Matchbook type of story or piece? And they're like, I definitely do. And I was like, why do you think that? And these are some of the things that they pointed to. And there's kind of like an urgency, I think, because of the nature of short pieces. Usually 1,000 words or less, oftentimes like much shorter, but then also our 1,000 word limit is not a hard limit. If somebody sends us something that's 1,200 words and it knocks our socks off, it doesn't really matter. We publish it anyway. So then when we take submissions, we open for submissions for usually about a week at a time, take in as much as we can, and then they're auto sorted. So everybody who's an editor at Matchbook, we have sort of behind the scenes, they're sort of like readers and editors, but everybody basically gets an equal vote. Like nobody's opinion is higher. Everything gets read minimum of once. It gets a vote. Anything that's gets a vote of like a yes or a maybe gets a second read. And ultimately a piece that we take has to receive 2 yeses. So if it gets a yes and then a maybe, it's got to be read a third time by somebody else, and that third vote will usually decide. If it gets another maybe, it's probably winds up being like a nice rejection. But yeah, 2 yeses is a mandatory for us to publish something, basically. So
do you ever encounter work that you really recognize as being good quality work, but it's not right for Matchbook?
For sure, yeah. We haven't really published a lot of like researchy stuff, like not like academic stuff, but there's a whole genre of writing that's sort of like essays that are a little bit more academic sounding if they're not academic themselves, or like more of a professional voice or something. We haven't done much of that. Mostly we haven't received it, but we have received a few over the years that I'm like, this is a really finely made piece of writing, but it just doesn't really feel like Matchbook to us. And so we might say this. Yeah, we might say that this is a really great thing, and there's probably like a really fantastic place for this to be published that would get like the right people who would be interested in it. So we're just, now that we sort of concocted in our minds this this illusion of what is a Matchbook piece for us, and operate that way, then we are trying to like match why people read Matchbook to the pieces that we're interested in and think are Matchbook stories or essays or whatever they are. So yeah, that definitely happens. And then we also have no problem just being honest with that to a writer and saying like, this isn't quite like a Matchbook piece for us, but like we think you're a really good writer. So if you have something else that you feel like is more like aligned with the kind of stuff that we do, then like send us more. You still get like a nice response from that, I think.
Yeah, I was looking at a work that's currently on the homepage, which is The Algorithm, which I thought was really cool. And it was funny because I was actually just thinking like, I wish more work in lit mags was about technology and how it interacts with our lives, because I haven't seen a lot of that. And then I looked at your journal, I was like, yes.
Yeah.
There it
is. Same. We don't, I don't know if we get a ton of it, but like we read that and we were like, yeah, like this is, it's not just that it's using that. It's like, obviously like a really well-rendered story. It's strange and interesting and makes me think about algorithms and how technology is deciding things about us and for us, in ways that like you sort of suspect or like worry about, but don't quite think about it in the same way as almost like as a character that you're following the algorithm as like the close character or something.
Right. Yeah.
Which was sort of strange, and like giving it that kind of agency, I thought was fascinating.
Yeah.
But yeah, I agree. Like I think it would be nice to see our contemporary lives reflected in some of the fiction that's getting published, more of it, I guess.
Yeah.
And that was actually something that Edward, back in the day in 2009, when we were writing our initial submission guidelines, which are still for the most part intact, Edward had this line about like, the work should express something about the time in which we live.
Hmm.
And that's really broad, but
Right,
I think that it could include like the algorithm, and the
right,
stuff that we're
right.
literally dealing with every single day, whether we quite realize it or not.
Yeah, that was exactly my next question, which is how much do you want the submissions to sort of integrate features of the contemporary world, or
Yeah,
um,
I mean, I think it could just be interpreted it like the way that he wrote that line. I think it could be interpreted like, yeah, we want stuff that's like, real contemporary in terms of like you can write about I don't know, political movements or whatever. But I also think it's vague enough that, it could just be like the emotional experience of living today. It doesn't
mhm,
like theoretically you can write a story that takes place in the 1890s, but
mhm.
it is really about the emotional experience of living today. I hope it is actually.
Yeah, yeah,
Um, so I mean, I think both have to happen
yeah,
basically for us to succeed as a journal.
yeah, it makes sense. Can you talk about the nonfiction? So it sounds like you don't publish like research heavy stuff. Is it more personal essay that you're looking for?
Yeah, I think it tends to be like creative nonfiction. I mean anything from weird single paragraph like Maggie Nelson Bluett's type, so you don't know what to make of it. Like it feels nonfiction, but it's like using all kinds of poetic
Mm,
and fictional devices to do what it's doing. It's like written in the voice of something that would be fiction or something, but or poetry, but it's nonfiction. Um, and then we used to call we shied away from this word, but we used to call it indeterminate
mm,
indeterminate prose.
mm,
That's just and now there's all kinds of other words for it, but like writing writing that is claiming to be nonfiction in some way, in that like I think they're not taking the as many creative or like fictional liberties as like fiction would, even with like a based on a true event type of thing. It's yeah, a lot more personal essays, a lot more I guess I don't know. It's like this is one of the things where it's like I don't know what you call it. It's like it's not quite a personal essay, but it does deal with some personal things, but it might deal with a topic that a writer was like fascinated with or interested in.
mm,
Um, so again, with that, it's sort of like such a wide range, and so that's why if anytime I've ever gotten somebody who's sort of like, you publish nonfiction, I say yes, and then they ask, well, what kind, and I sort of just say, oh, I can just send you a few things because like some of them are really hard to do. Like I
mhm,
can't describe what this thing is,
mhm,
um, but also it's only 300 words, so it's easy to read it and sort of,
mhm.
you know, I think you can get it more viscerally when you
Yeah,
read it. But
yeah. What are some common reasons for work to be rejected?
um, I mean, we get a lot of really good stuff that we have to reject, and then we get stuff that just clearly isn't right. The it can be a mixture of, so we love publishing, like a lot of journals do. We love publishing people for the first time.
Mm,
It's just like one of the biggest thrills to me personally is to give somebody their first publication credit. Um, Publication in the writing world isn't the end all be all of everything, but if you're trying to play the game, it can be a little harsh
mhm.
and make you feel bad a lot of the time.
Mhm.
So it's really nice to give somebody a really good feeling.
Yeah.
But that said, we still get a lot of like newish writers who are, just maybe they're submitting for the first time. I don't know. And like, their writing is, they might have some things happening that are really interesting, but ultimately it's just not their craft isn't quite there and they
Mhm.
need to keep going.
Yeah.
Um, or I mean, all the typical stuff that it's like, if it's like, I don't tend to like a lot of gross stuff, whatever that means to you. Or like really extreme stuff. I just really want to read stuff where it makes me feel alive. Um,
Mm,
and it makes me feel alive and it makes me feel connected to other people. It doesn't mean good things have to happen in it. But, you know, I think a lot of journals will have like, disclaimers about, we don't want stuff of like that glorifies violence and all that kind of stuff. We don't have anything on the website that says that explicitly, but we also probably don't.
Mhm.
Or like anything that's, uh, you know, things in which it seems like the writer is unaware of their own biases, I
Mhm.
guess,
Mhm.
would be stuff that we're uninterested in. Um, I'm interested in the subconscious choices that writers make, but not the like actively ignorant bias.
Mhm. That's interesting. Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, what do you see a lot of right now? I'm always interested, because editors, I think, have their finger on the pulse in terms of trends, both stylistic trends and also like what people are writing about in the world today. So, in terms of subject matter, are you seeing a lot of a particular thing? And then also in terms of style, is there a particular style you're seeing a lot of?
Yeah, it's weird how it happens, like
Mhm.
the zeitgeist, or like what people are trending. For a while, um, it was like it was animals. There were
Mm.
like animals in all, like there were so many stories where it was like about a bear, you know, which is fine, but it was just really strange. Like, okay, and then I open up the next submission and it's like about a tiger. It's like a different writer from a different country, just sort of like,
Right.
what's happening? Like, what? Like, I don't understand. Um, but yeah, I mean, I'm trying to think of some other things. Like there does tend to be trends in writing, like for a while there, for several years, like this, second person was like everybody was writing in the second person. I think so much so that a lot of journals were like, don't send us stories in second person.
Heard that a lot, actually. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that that's just a response to the fact that there was so many submissions. It gets funny when you're sort of like, so this week I read, in my queue, I read 30 submissions
Mhm.
and like 26 of them were in the second person. And you're sort of like, what is going on? Like, is this what, is the MFA programs, are they
Right.
just focusing on second person or like what? Um, but I mean, I don't mind it because like to me, a great piece in the second person is like totally amazing.
Mhm. Mhm.
But those sorts of moves, or those sorts of like, genre choices or device choices, I feel like pop up a lot where
Mhm.
it'll just be sometimes it's just a few months, because we're usually only open for a week, like every few months, like once a season maybe.
Okay.
Um, and partly that's, we only publish 26 pieces a year. So there's not a lot of slots. And
Mhm.
so, also I mean, we like to give pieces a lot of reading time, like submissions, read a lot of read, like there's a lot of submissions that like, although if I ultimately am the first reader and I decide, no, it's not going to get more reads, but I might have read that piece like 4 or 5 times by
Mhm.
the time I actually said no.
Mhm.
Um, so like, we like to give things a lot of time and effort. So you do start noticing those trends,
Mhm.
even with we're not getting 15,000 submissions a year, but we're probably, I mean, we accept multiple, people can send us multiple pieces. Like we say 3 if they're shortish, 5 if they're longish. And you can interpret whatever that means. But so a lot of people, I'd say the majority of people send more than one piece. So like if we have in a week individual pieces, we might have 1,000 pieces in that one week. Um, that still winds up being a lot to get through to get down to our 26 that we're
Mhm.
going to publish for the year. Um, Now I lost what.
Oh, I was stylistic trends, I
Yeah,
think.
stylistic trends. So
Yeah.
like I was just trying to come up with like another good example of one. Um, the well, interestingly, what I haven't been seeing is I haven't been seeing a lot of like playing with form as much.
Hmm.
At least just since we restarted again and the few times that we've been open, and all of the stuff that we've like, it's a lot of it is like, just, I mean, it's fine. It's just been classic straight prose. And
Hmm.
like, I feel like in the past, we've maybe received more like strange forms, I guess, you
Hmm.
know, like, I mean, for example, like a piece we published years back was in the form of like a bank ledger or like a statement, you know, like
Hmm.
a checking account
Right,
statement,
right.
you know, and it winds up being telling the story of this like guy who gets radicalized and goes and like commits a mass shooting, but you uncover that through his bank
Hmm.
statement,
Hmm. Hmm.
which was just sort of crazy and
Yeah,
interesting. And but like just that sort of formal play, um,
right,
I haven't been seeing as much of, and I'm not sure if there's a like, this is the thing is like, you never really know if there's a reason for it or if it
right.
just happens that like the next time we're open, we're gonna get a bunch of weird, you
Yeah, you're
know,
gonna get all these
yeah, there's
big
gonna be
statements
prose in like the shape of a
yeah.
pigeon or something. Yeah, I
Right,
don't.
right, right, right.
Yeah,
Do you have any personal pet peeve? This conversation about second person made me think about pet peeves. And I see on X all the time that people are saying like, no more,
right,
third person past tense. I won't read
right, right,
it. And I notice actually in my reading now I have a thing about first person present tense. I just like,
right.
yeah,
You're over it for
I'm
now.
over it. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Let me think. Let's see. There must be some like because I can remember the feeling
Mhm.
of feeling the pet peeve.
Right.
Um, let's see. Uh, let me think. What's something? Well, the funny thing is, this is actually not even, this is before I even get to the piece. This is just like a running a literary journal thing is I really don't like when people fully summarize the piece in their letter.
In the cover letter?
Yeah.
Oh, interesting.
Because I just want to read it kind of, it's not blind to their name or their identity, but it's blind to like, I have no idea what it's about,
Right,
or how it's going to be or whatever. And I don't, and I want that part to remain blind. And
right.
so I do like to read like the little few sentences that people might write to
Mm,
say like, oh, I found your journal through this, or I've like read Matchbook a long time, or whatever, you know, or they're just, you know, or it's even interesting when they just are using the cover letter format of like the writer's almanac or something, you know.
mm,
Um, but yeah, sometimes people will just like be like, so this story is called, you know, Natural Born Sower. And
mhm.
it's a story about a lost girl who blah blah blah. And just sort of like, I don't want any, I was like, I
Right,
stopped reading the cover letter at that point. I'm like, nope.
right. Is that
Um,
also true for nonfiction? Like, what if someone says this is based on my Trek, you know?
I think if it's like very basic, if
Yeah.
it's like this is a nonfiction piece of a hiking trip I went on in the Rocky Mountains, I'll
Mhm.
just be like, okay.
Yeah.
But I don't want it to be like it's about me finding a part of my identity when I reach the peak of one of the tallest
Right.
parts. Like just like like
Right.
I don't need any of that.
Right.
Um,
And you also publish, oh yeah, go ahead.
no, no, go ahead.
You also publish author
Yeah,
inspirations, which
yeah,
I really like that. They do that also in Best American Short Story,
mhm,
like just hearing what inspired the writer to write the piece. I
yeah.
love. So why did you decide to do that?
Yeah, that was from the beginning, when it was me and Edward. And I mean, part of it I think was there's like a little element of trying to differentiate yourself from other journals. Um, but then also, yeah, at that time, I don't remember who was doing it, but there was maybe a journal or two that were doing it at the time, but it was like mostly not the rule. Um, and we just thought like, I really love hearing from the writer. Like they don't have to like, you know, elucidate the mystery of the piece,
Mhm.
but and sometimes we'll actually we do edit the author's notes too, because sometimes writers do get into doing that, and we're sort of like, no, 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 we don't want that. We want, you know, tell us about something else, but not, you know, you don't have to explain the piece.
Yeah.
But do love hearing either like if there's an interesting anecdote about how the piece came to be, or if there's, this piece is like the 9th attempt at me trying to write this story or trying to write this essay or whatever. I have 8 very bad attempts before this. Or that like it was generated from a workshop they took or whatever, or they're working on I love it when they talk about working on an element of craft, and they really get into it. But then there's other ones. We always say like we say to an acceptance, like please write an author's note. Try to find a wider range of attempts in the archive, but don't also feel constrained by those attempts, because someone's always winds up surprising us by writing an author's note about something that has it seemingly upon first read has nothing to do with the piece exactly, but you'll notice there's like one word in the piece, and then that word is in the author's note, and it's just like, this is just how this person's either brain is working or how they want to represent themselves, their actual voice, not their like the voice in the piece. So I really love the wide range of approaches that writers will give the author's note.
Do you mentioned editing the author's note a little bit. Do you work with writers to edit the pieces?
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. We always edit the pieces. We tend not to be, for the most part, I would say we tend not to be heavy-handed. But we do, I just feel like, Edward and I thought this, and RB and I thought this, and I think the current people who work on Matchbook also think this, is that if we're going to call ourselves editors, then we have to do some editing. We're not just like picking candy out of a hat, and some pieces might require more than others. Like we just accepted a piece that's like a really short, super short sort of poetic paragraph that we didn't have any edits on. We just didn't have anything to suggest. But then I always use this as a great example of like, we nervously made a big suggestion. So this was on a Dina Rel's piece called The Diner. She had sent us this story, and it was written, it was in sections, and each section was numbered, and each section only had like a sentence or two, and there were like 12 numbered sections. And we loved all of the sentences, and we were like, but why like we were feeling resistant to it, even though we loved everything in it. And we had published her before, so we had a rapport with her, and so we were like, okay, we wrote back and said, we have a suggestion. We're like, what if we just ditch the sections altogether and you clump all this together? Because it's basically just a set of observations that take place in a diner, and it feels more like being in a diner with all these observations just sandwiched together, because like you're sitting at this booth and you're eating your food, you're looking around, you're talking to the waiter, you're just you're in that world. We feel like that feels more like what it's like to be in a diner. But we also made the suggestion with the caveat that if you really wish you could punch our face reading this, it's okay. Like you can say no, and then like maybe this piece isn't going to work, but we love your writing, and send us something else. But she wrote back and was like, oh my God, I never considered this. And she loved the idea. And it was like so it exists in publication radically different than how she wrote it.
Great.
I would say that's not the average. We usually just making line edits, minor edits, or if it's a content edit, something that feels like a linchpin for a line or a section or a paragraph. And if it's a linchpin for the piece as a whole, it might come with a more conditional acceptance.
And so when you said you accept up to 3 pieces by a writer, will you accept for publication all 3 pieces, or do you just want to see like a range of what they're working on?
So for the most part, we accept 1. So we are open to receive several to read.
Yeah.
But yeah, we will just accept one of them usually, unless I'm trying to remember back. 2009 was a long time ago, but I'm trying to remember back through all the years. It might have happened sometime where a writer sent us like 3 really short things, and we were like, they're kind of really cool all together, and we might have said like, can we just do all of them? So it's not out of the realm of possibility. But what was the second part of your question was
If you'll publish more than one piece. So it sounds like generally you just publish the one.
we published one, yeah.
Yeah.
But there was something else interesting in there that I wanted to say.
Oh, you're open for submissions for up to 3 pieces. So you want to see like the range of
Yes, that was it.
Yeah.
So yes, I think we're really interested in like writer's intention. And so like I'm personally a big proponent of like, you know, a writer gets credit for the choices they make subconsciously as much as the choices that they make consciously. However, when it comes to like craft and like, you know, sort of feeling like you're in some control of what you're doing, I think that's an important part too. And I think for us, you can't always see that in a piece if it's just a few hundred words. It might be like a bonkers interesting couple of paragraphs or paragraph, but sometimes we found that we were left feeling like, I wish I could read like another piece from this writer, see if what I'm reading in this is like how much intention was in it, or you know, did they write a good piece sort of on accident? And the thing is, like, that's fine. Like, and it's not to say that that piece shouldn't be published, but I think that's less what Matchbook is interested in.
Yeah.
It's more interested in that sort of intention. And
so will you ever say to a writer, we really like this piece, but we like elements of what you're doing in this second piece. Can you bring, like, we can see that you're capable of XYZ. Can you bring in those other elements into this piece?
Yeah, I mean, if that was the comment that we had, then yeah, I think we feel confident in our editing abilities and in our respect for the writer and our attempts to be transparent, that we would say like, this is what we're thinking. We always, you know, this is what we're suggesting or asking, but we always say it with the idea that, and being explicit that this is a dialogue between you and us. Like if we're going to publish something, then it's got to be there's going to be a little bit of a collaboration. Because like your piece is going to represent you, but also it's now going to represent us as a publication, and we're going to represent you into some degree because your name is going to be there. So then like there's, to me, that is some agreement between the two parties that like we might need to come to a consensus on something. And if that is like, oh, this other piece, the second piece actually has a really interesting thing that you do, is there a way you can pull this into the first piece? I mean, I would feel confident asking that, but saying it with the fact that like, this is a dialogue. We always say in our acceptances, you know, to consider these edits, just and know that like, we don't make any edit sort of haphazardly. We've sort of thought deeply about every single edit, and we don't give the justification for all the edits in that first acceptance, but we say like, you know, if you want to have a dialogue about this, the follow-up email, I've written paragraphs and paragraphs talking about, you know, the editorial discussion that we had about why we think, you know, this word really needs to go, or like whatever the comment is. So then we have and I would say if there's ever any pushback by a writer in the first, like, yeah, I don't really want, like, it's more just like, you know, it feels like the writer not wanting to have their stuff tampered with, which I get, I'm a writer too. But once we actually give I would say 99% of the time, once we give our justifications, they go, oh,
Mhm.
okay, I agree with everything.
Yeah. This is very helpful because I think some writers are confused sometimes about why they're being asked to submit more than one piece if a magazine's only going to publish the one piece. So a follow-up question is, should the pieces relate to one another or should writers not worry? Should they just send their best three that they have?
I would say their best three that they have that feel like, you know, are a good match in their
Mhm,
opinion for Matchbook.
mhm, mhm,
Um, yeah, they don't need to relate to each other. They can be three wildly different pieces. I
mhm.
think for us as editors, it's just useful to see, oh, this piece is like feels totally wild and like, on fire. The second piece is a quiet, like controlled thing. And then the third piece is like something totally different, but is also like feels like the writer knows what they're doing. That shows me that this writer has like insane command,
Hmm,
uh, to me.
mhm,
And so where if I just got one piece that was like felt like on fire and unbalanced,
mhm.
it's like, is it just because as a writer they're on fire and unbalanced? Like did they capture, did they just have like caught a Tasmanian devil and like turned it into the box?
Right,
Or or did they start fashioning something and realize like, oh, this is a weird one. I'm gonna run with it and use all of my skills to fashion it into something wild.
right.
Um, like we want that. We want the second one.
Right. Right. So why, I guess a question is why does it matter? Like if the piece is working and it is this wild thing, um, or is
Yeah,
this more like in a case where the piece isn't fully working and you're not quite sure why or how, or you're not quite sure like where the writer is coming from?
right. I guess the short answer is it probably doesn't matter. And it that like I was saying before, like that piece, if it feels unhinged, and I enjoyed it,
Yeah.
um, it I think there's just this might just be a slightly personal thing, and so
Mm,
that it's a personal thing that comes through in the journal that I run.
yeah.
But I want to have the context. Should I say, how do I say this? Like I want to, the work is really important,
Mm,
but also the people who produce the work are really important.
mm,
Um, and I just think for me, I find I sometimes will make poorer decisions if I divorce one from the other.
mm,
Um, as an editor or as a writer myself in the world. It's not to say I can't separate people from the art. I can, but these, we're not talking about like a painter from the 1800s, and it doesn't really matter because they're dead.
mm,
These are like people living in the world right now, trying their best to work on art,
mm,
and they want to get other people to read their work. And also, this goes along with like editing the author's notes. Like if we're going to publish somebody, I want to put them out and make them look as good as possible.
mm,
Like I want the writers to look great,
mhm.
um, in the presentation of their work and the presentation of themselves. And like we've definitely edited things out of author's notes where I was like, you don't want to say this. Like you don't want to say this. Like um this will cause you grief. And so like, but it's because like, I don't know, like I just think that feels like a part of a job of an editor
Mm,
is to help the writer put their best foot forward. And in order for me to do that, I have to know what your best feet are.
mm, mhm.
um, and I have a hard time. This is probably just a lack of skill, and for me is I have a hard time if I get one piece and it's like a little unhinged, and I can't really tell which parts are like the writer letting you know, the universe take their spirit and which parts are like them being like, I know what I was doing here.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm fine with the universe taking the spirit in the story. Like, I love that.
Mhm.
But as somebody who is a writer and interested in craft and interested in like knowing why I feel things when
Mhm.
I read it, when I start parsing that out, if I feel like I don't know where the writer is and where the spirit is, um, I just get confused. I get lost, I think.
Yeah, that's interesting. So let's say a writer is hearing this and they're thinking, oh gosh, I only have one flash piece. Should
That's
they?
fine.
Okay.
Just send.
Right. Okay.
Um, so because like it's not to say like many people send us just one piece to read.
Mhm.
So, and I will say that like it's not the average that this comes into play.
Right.
It's not the average submission. It's just it comes into play sometimes, and
Mhm.
I've had to think about it and do it this way because it um just gives us a better sense of
Yeah.
it. And so, but you know, there's plenty of pieces there. They submitted one piece, we thought it was amazing, and we
Mhm.
accepted it.
Mhm. I
So
think it's very helpful because I think writers wonder why is this magazine asking for up to 5 poems when they're only
right.
going to publish one? So it sounds like to give, if an editor is sort of on the fence or an editor is not fully sure what the writer is attempting, it gives a kind of greater context for their ambition.
Yeah. And also it sometimes can actually I don't know if this is the right way to say it, but it sort of protect Matchbook from a writer that maybe in one piece is seems really interesting and like, oh, I kind of like what this person is doing here. And then I read something in one of the other pieces that makes them go, ouch. Like, not that it was bad, but like that maybe they have something in there that like is that sort of like violation of like you're really showing a bias here
Mm,
that is questionable.
mm,
um, so then I have to think as like an editor and a representative of Matchbook, like, do we want to associate ourselves
mm.
with somebody? Maybe we would want to publish this piece, but if this piece gets published somewhere else, I don't know that I want to be associated with that.
That's really interesting. It's
Yeah.
like a whole other topic for another
Yeah.
interview. So yeah, like do you feel like the other work could reflect, let's say there's like this one piece that just is amazing,
Right.
but then the other work could cast a shadow on
Oh
that.
yeah. I mean, I think as an editor, I think you are missing an opportunity to avoid a lot of pain and grief
Mm,
by not considering that.
mm,
Especially today when like there's like the weird plagiarism stuff happening. There's like the there's like the people harassing other people. There's in the lit world, I mean everywhere, but like in the lit world, all that stuff, and or other people, like abusive behaviors and like all this kind of weird, terrible stuff that like you don't want to be anything a part of. And not that you can always gauge that through people's work, but sometimes you can depending on the piece,
mm.
depending on how a writer like unveils a story or
Yeah.
something, and not in a way that sort of like seems like they're winking at you, they're doing a thing.
Mhm.
Like if it seems like they're not doing a thing, they're just like representing an opinion or something that I'm sort of like, I'm not really down with that.
Yeah.
I don't, yeah, I don't, it's like, never mind. We're just going to reject things because
Right.
I don't want to get in I'm not
Yeah.
interested in firestorms.
It's very interesting. It sounds like the other work, I mean, it's a craft thing, but it's also can be like a gut check thing. Like
Yeah.
if you're picking up like a vibe from a
Yes.
piece and you're not really sure,
Yeah.
am I right? Like,
Yes.
what am I picking up here? And then the other work is like, oh, okay, this is
Right.
something
It's
that,
it can sometimes be that like concluding idea or feeling of like it's like I'm a strong maybe, but I have weird doubts that I can't
yeah,
quite express. And then you read a couple of the other pieces and you go, oh, okay, yeah, it's a no.
Yeah. And I think I probably want to jump in and emphasize this is like the exception, not the
Yeah,
norm, because I suspect like a lot of writers hear this kind of thing and they start to get
like,
nervous,
oh God,
and like,
yeah.
oh my God, like this editor is going to be like looking into my, personal history to me.
No, 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 no. I like
Like
it.
I suspect that you're talking about, and I think generally we tend to focus on, this is probably like, I'm guessing maybe 0.01% of the
Yes,
that you get, and
it
most
almost
are, yeah,
almost doesn't come up.
right.
But because of when it does come up, it can be so potentially
Mhm,
harmful to somebody somewhere.
mhm,
Like I have to allow for it in the system.
right.
I have to allow for that protection in the system.
Mhm, mhm. Really interesting. So now you have this larger staff, and how has that buoyed you in your work? And I want to
Yeah,
ask a question that I ask all editors, which is like how you kind of protect yourself now from burnout, and
yeah.
how you manage this with your own writing. And also, like, honestly, like, are there moments where you're like, why am I doing this? Like, I have such limited time for my
Yeah.
craft,
Right.
and like,
Right.
why am I, writing 3-page long editorial letters to these writers? And
Right. Right. It's a good question. So okay, the first part was
there's
um
a lot. So
yeah.
the first part is, how is the larger staff, has it changed
Oh
your
yeah. Okay, so yeah.
merchandising? Do you feel more buoyed now? And how are you sort of guarding against burnout?
So we restarted in June. So we haven't been going super long since we restarted, but like, yeah, we've had a couple of people come in and do a little bit and then say, you know what, actually I can't help out. But we have a staff of, I want to say, I think they're about 5 right now. It's been an adjustment for me because I've only ever been in like basically a partnership.
Mhm.
Um, and I still view it as like a sort of a democratic experience. But people, because I'm the person who started Matchbook, I'm the person who, runs the website and blah, blah, blah. Like I am the de facto, like people defer to me.
Mhm.
So I have to accept that. And, I'm going to be making decisions that other people are going to be like, what's the decision, boss?
Great.
Um, and that's fine. Uh, but it's been really great, I would say, to be able to like, oh, when the people who joined up were joining up, they were kind of afraid. They were like, well, Matchbook kind of has this vibe, and they were like, I'm afraid to break it. I'm afraid to like,
Mhm.
like, what if I don't, you know, what if my taste doesn't really 100% line up? But I was like, you know what? I wouldn't have asked you if I didn't think your taste was amazing.
Mhm.
And if your taste is a little different, then that's a good thing. That means Matchbook will evolve. Like it'll evolve to include that. Maybe it won't include something else anymore. Like that's fine. Like like I asked you to join up because I value your opinion and taste. So I just try to like have them feel like, no, like the reason that you're here is for that, is for your taste. So that was just a fun, unanticipated challenge for me personally. To sort of have to, I want everybody to feel included and like they're contributing, and I didn't think about that. Um, but in terms of reading submissions and deciding on things, it was just sort of, that we set up the system of how we do it. The sort of yes, no, maybes, yeses have to get, acceptances have to get 2 yeses. Anything that doesn't get that, it's depending on the votes it got, strong, a nice rejection or a rejection. Um, um, and then it's been really nice in terms of burnout to not usually what we did before was like we just took everything and sliced them down the middle, and then I
Mhm.
read half and RB read half, and then we would come, if one of us had a maybe, we would swap those. Um, but there was a lot. It was a lot. It was reading so many submissions, and that definitely by the end of we give ourselves 3 months to read them. And by the end of 3 months, when it was just two people, it was just sort of like, you're like, I question a lot of things in my life right now. And then, but with the burden being stretched out a little bit to between 4 and 6 people, it's
Yeah.
so much better, so much better, so much. And like I could, this version of it, I feel like I could do for a lot longer. Even though the first version I did for 12 years, but, and then, with like the spending my time on it, I mean, this is the reason why I started it up again, was just because I felt like this was coming out of COVID and doing the reassessing that I feel like some people were doing of like, what do I care about?
Right.
I just realized that I think I really care about this, and I really cared about having a finger on what was happening in like absolute contemporary literature, what people are literally writing
Yeah.
now. And just being in the lit world, there's a lot of really wonderful people, I think, in the lit world, in the indie lit world, but probably in the lit world in general.
Mhm. Probably.
Probably. But in the little circles that I travel in, there's a lot of really wonderful people. And when I stopped doing Matchbook, that, to some degree, that there was some distance grown there because you're just not doing the same things anymore. And so I kind of missed it. And I
Yeah.
realized there was something in my life that I missed. And so, and everybody who signed up, seems like that they're getting signed up to work for Matchbook. Seems like they're getting something out of it. They're getting some joy out of
Yeah. That's
being
great.
connected to it. So
Have one final question. Have you found that it serves your own writing, or maybe just serves your writing in the sense that you have a break from your writing every now and then, or are there like points of conflict with the magazine and your own work?
I don't know if it has direct, it probably does have some direct connection to my writing, but I don't know if I could put my finger on what that is. But I feel like more what I could say is that I think it's more directly connected to that greater idea of what I want to spend my hours on. Like, if I want to spend my hours on obviously my personal expression and my writing, but yeah, I can't be spending time on that all the time.
Mhm.
And so these other hours, what would I like to be spending it on? I still like to be spending it on art and literature.
Yeah.
And this is a way to do that.
Mhm.
And they're obviously connected because they're like a similar, they're directly connected in that way. And I think as it keeps my editor brain sharp,
Yeah.
and that is gonna be good for my own writing,
Mhm.
even though it's obviously hard to edit your own work,
Mhm.
but definitely editing people's work for creative work for 12 years was definitely good for my own writing, in terms of like when I put my writing down and go back to it,
Mhm.
coming at it with my Matchbook editor brain
Mhm.
is a good thing
Yeah.
ultimately for
Yeah.
anybody else who has to read it.
Actually, one final question. This last question. And thank you so much, by the way. This has been really, really interesting and great.
Cool.
So how do people find out about when the submission window is open? Should they follow you on social media, sign up for a newsletter?
Yeah, so right now, yeah, social media. So we're on X, Twitter. We're on Blue Sky, and we're on Instagram, and we do post. We usually will post a few weeks ahead of time that
Mhm.
we're going to be open for a week,
Okay.
next month or something, and we will be specific about the dates, and then when they do go, yeah, at Matchbook Lit Mag.
Okay.
Yeah, at Matchbook Lit Mag, I think, is the handle for most of the social media.
Okay. Sounds great.
Yeah.
Well, Brian, thank you so much. We'll let you go get back to teaching,
Yeah.
molding young minds, and
Yep.
thank you for your time today.
Thanks, Becky. This has been real fun.